Thank you to Harry Lucas for getting the conference going, and to the EAF for putting the whole thing on, and thanks to the organizers for letting me speak. The program says I'm at Plymouth State University, but since applying to come to the conference, I've landed my dream job at Northern Arizona University. So I guess technically I'm currently unemployed, but August 20th I'll have a good job. So if you have any questions or want to chat with me, there's a bunch of ways to get a hold of me: email, my webpage, and I'm all over Twitter. So go ahead and get a hold of me. I'd love to chat with people after this. So I'm going to sort of talk to you a little bit about what I've been doing the last few semesters in terms of grading and trying to solve this optimization problem with giving students good feedback and not killing myself. So let me give you a little bit of motivation and some disclaimers. So when I first started using IBL, grading was the one thing that caused me the most anxiety. So I had no experience as a student with the Moore method or IBL. I barely knew what it was. And the first time I ever really had a concrete description of it was at a workshop that Carol Schumacher did for Project Next. She did like an hour-long thing. I sat there, and by most metrics, I had been a good teacher. And I didn't have any real reason to sort of change, but I was ready to sort of do something new, and Carol's workshop inspired me to sort of go give it a shot. But I didn't really know anything about it. So I'm sitting down the next semester to prep for my intro to proof class, and I sort of was brought up in teaching with this sort of very structured, like you gotta have data to justify everything, everything's gotta be in the syllabus, you have to spell everything out. And so I wanted my IBL class to sort of fit that role like everything else I'd ever done. So I'm soliciting feedback from lots of people and saying, well, how do you grade presentations and how do you do this? And they're like, oh, you'll know what they get. And I'm like, oh, I need data. So I'm not so anxious about that anymore. I think I sort of settled into an appropriate thing, but it was an issue for me at first about how do I grade presentations? How do I not kill myself when I'm grading proofs? And so I'll sort of show you where I've sort of settled into a groove. It seems to be working for me. So I had a desire for data to justify a letter grade. That's something I wanted. Grading written work, at least for me, is super time consuming. And so how do I find a way to sort of do a good job at that and not kill myself? And I wanted the feedback that I was pouring all this time and energy into actually be useful for the students. And after some trial and error, I've settled on an approach I think works pretty well for me, and that's sort of what I'm going to tell you about. And I'm not going to say anything earth-shattering. Most of what I'm going to say I think you've sort of heard before, so I'll just sort of say maybe one little thing, and hopefully you'll think, hey, that's cool, I might try that. So here's the optimization problem. There's these three categories, and of course we want the first two on the left to sort of, be high, and I'd like to minimize the time required. Not that we don't care, but I fail miserably at sort of minimizing this. I'm not very good at this. I feel like I do a pretty good job over here. So this is the sort of optimization problem that I'm sort of trying to resolve. So here's the big picture to sort of give you an indication of where I've done this and sort of where things are going. So I've not necessarily exactly what I'm going to tell you, but some modification of this on my way to what I currently do. I've done this in my intro to proof class, number theory, abstract algebra, and real analysis. And I've done it with class sizes anywhere from 10 to 30 students. I think it would work for smaller and bigger, but that's been my experience. In my classes, I do a pretty traditional Moore method approach. The one really big exception is that I really encourage collaboration. I would say that's the one major departure from a traditional Moore method class. So I really encourage the students to work together quite a bit. Here's sort of what I currently have as my typical grade determination. I don't claim that this is perfect. I change this around from semester to semester, but this is sort of what I've settled on. And I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about the presentations and participation and focus mostly on sort of what I do for homework and how that plays into the presentations. That's the percent breakdown. And I have a sort of modified version of this that I do for calculus and linear algebra. And I'll sort of hopefully be able to mention where the overlap is. So what happens on a day-to-day basis in the room? In some modified Moore method classes, the students are just responsible for continuing to work through the notes. And I like to give them concrete benchmarks about sort of where they should focus on and what to do. So I give them an assignment that's basically 5 to 10 tasks, and it depends on how difficult they are, how many I assign. And those tasks consist of maybe some easy exercises and some proofs, and some of the proofs might be hard, some of them might be easy, but roughly 5 to 10 sort of items on a theorem sequence. And I assign those each day, And what I assign is based on where we just finished the previous class. And sometimes I have to modify my plan. So, but that's what happens. And those are due at the beginning of the next class. And students are responsible for digesting the new material outside of class. That's what their job is, to sort of look at those tasks, figure out what it is that they need to do to be able to sort of pull that off. And then in class, nearly all class time is devoted to students presenting their proposed solutions or proofs to the assigned tasks. And normally, the students volunteer to present. Almost always when I walk in the room, the students have already put a list of names down about who's going to do what, so I don't have to do anything. Sometimes I walk in and there's no list, and I have to sort of call on people. But typically, they sort of choose on their own about who's going to present what, sort of negotiate that in advance. Occasionally, students will email me the day before and say, I really want theorem 4.5. I've worked my butt off on it. That one's mine. And then I won't let anybody else have it. But they can volunteer in advance. But typically, I don't have to sort of call on people in class. They're willing to sort of play the game. So what's my job in class? Well, I'm there to facilitate discussion, keep us on track. I want to be Mr. Super Positive all the time. That's my job, to sort of just keep boosting them up, fluffing their feathers, and sort of keeping them on track. And then here's what my students would say. They like to joke that I sit in the corner and cross my arms and say, but I think they like that. But that would be what my students say that they do. And at any time, the students can sort of spontaneously request mini lectures or outside of class screencasts. So I'm always going to start a class with, well, does anybody have any questions? Do you need me to talk about anything? And they might say, I didn't understand concept X at all. Can you talk about it? So I'm sort of just prepared on the spot to sort of maybe do a five-minute little mini lecture if we need to maybe work through some examples. They don't do that very often, but when I sort of know when it's going to come up when the concepts get difficult. And I've started experimenting with screencasts a little bit. My students will ask me, maybe email me and say, hey, can you do a little 5-minute screencast on such and such topic so it'll help us out with the exercises at home, and
So
I might do that.
Screencast?
Basically, a video where I write on a whiteboard and talk. I use my iPad to do it. They're usually 2 to 5 minutes long. Give them an example of something. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the student presentations, about how I manage that. Initially, this is the thing that gave me the most anxiety about grading. So I'll just talk a little bit about how I manage that. This is not something I'm dead set on. I have mixed feelings about whether this is a good idea or not, but I've set currently benchmarks for my students. So there's some minimum goals throughout the semester. So currently, and it varies if I have a really big class, I tell the students, you got to present at least 2 times prior to each exam. And they have 2 midterms and a final. So they have to present at least 6 times to get a passing grade on the presentation part. So if they just go to the board 6 times and drool a little bit, then they're going to get at least a 60 on that category. But at least gives them a minimum to shoot for. But they're not going to get an A necessarily unless they did the 6 hardest problems of the semester. But at least gives them a minimum thing. And I'm not sure that's a good idea or not. For most of the students, I think this is a good thing. But for some of them, they abuse it, as you imagine they might. They do their 2 and they walk away, and they're like, I don't have to do anything for a month now. That doesn't happen very often, but I do worry about it. I think it's better for most of my students, and there's a few it doesn't really work for, and I wish I could sort of change the syllabus for each student. But I'm not sure it's a great idea, but that's currently how I manage it. I take notes during the presentation, and then right after class, I add those into a spreadsheet. So by the end of the semester, my spreadsheet is like 10 pages long. Just goes and goes and goes. Every day I have some notes. And so here are the things that I write down. Who did what, basically. Was it an exercise or a proof? And this is something I think I need to modify, because I write little notes about it, but I think maybe I need 2 categories. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. And then some miscellaneous notes. Oh, they were fantastic and they did this thing really well. I need to remind them that they were awesome, or here are the little things that maybe they needed to work on. And so just little things to help me remember when I look back at it, what happened. And then I also give a score, 1 through 4 on that, based on this rubric. And you don't have to read these, but basically most students get a 3, 4 being the best. And I give half points all the time. That's a 3.5. But basically the students have this on the syllabus, and I jot this number down. This is me trying to satisfy my data desire. But every time a student goes to the board, they get a number. At the end of the semester, I've got this giant spreadsheet. And something Carol Schumacher said to me in an email when I did my first class, she said to me, I think, I recall this correctly, that the #1 indicator of the student's grade is how many times have they come to the board. And that was the thing I most looked at, just tried to have relative scores and have the data justify it. I had an average of these things, but I only really used it to make sure I was being fair. But I really looked through that spreadsheet. I had plenty of data to justify the grade in the end. So I want to talk about the daily homework, and this I think is the most interesting thing I'm going to say. These are the problems that form the backbone of the class, as you would expect. These are the things the students present. The problems that the students present are based on where we ended the last class, and this is the point of the talk right here. So when I thought about what I was going to say today, I thought felt tip pens, and then all I had to do was put at least a few minutes worth of stuff on either side of felt tip pens. So my talk really is about felt tip pens. I got this idea from Clark Dollard at Metro State University. I reminded him that he gave me this idea, but he looked at me like he had no idea what I was talking about. We were having a discussion on a listserv after an ideal workshop about being able to tell what work students had when they walked in the room versus when they left. And this idea of the felt tip pens came up. And it's not my idea, but I would like to tell you that this is the most awesome thing that's ever happened in my teaching. It's this amazing thing, and I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit. It's such a minor thing. By the way, purple is really popular with my students. They like to fight over the pens. So let me tell you a little bit about the pens. So each student grabs a felt tip pen on their way into class. So I have a box that's now got duct tape around it because it's got beat up. And they each grab the pen, and they like to get there early so they can get the purple one, and nobody ever grabs the red one. And the students use the pens to annotate their homework in light of the presentation that's happening in class and the related discussion. Now, my whole desire for this was I just wanted to know what did they have when they walked in the room versus when they left, because I was going to grade that stuff. And that was really all I wanted, but it's turned into this amazing thing. All these little secondary things have popped out of this, and I'm going to sort of explain a little bit. There's no penalty when I grade their homework for the use of the pen. They can write all over that thing as much as they possibly want. It doesn't impact their grade at all. And then when I grade this, and this is where the time saving comes in, when I grade this, it's just on a check system. They either get a check minus, a check, or a check plus. And basically, what did they have done before class? I'm thinking of this as their first draft. They've never tried these problems before. They're doing it for the first time. And they're going to sit down and sort of go over stuff in class and annotate with their pen. And I'm basically going to look at it really quickly, and if there's stuff down for every problem, it's going to be basically a check plus, no matter how much ink is on there. If they turn in a sheet of paper that's all felt tip, I give them a check minus. Okay, they didn't really have anything down, but they came to class, they participated, they took some notes. And the check, obviously, is someplace in between. So it's really quick for me to grade, and I can sort of see what people are doing, and it keeps them honest. They know that I can tell what they had before when they came in the room. So let me give you some advantages of this. I know exactly what happened when they walked in the room and they police each other. There was one girl in class this semester who would constantly try and alternate felt tip and pencil, and the students said none of that. They would they'd rip it out of her hand and make sure it was all felt tip all the time. I can't, you're just gonna have to trust me. I promise that this is true. This next bullet, I don't have any evidence for it. I need to maybe think about how to study this, but the students mark up their work in ways they didn't before. If I just handed them the paper, and they had their pencil and they were taking notes like they would any other time, it's not the same. And I can tell by looking at it. They write down their thoughts about what they were thinking, and they draw arrows, and they annotate in a way that they didn't before, and it's this really amazing thought process. So it's pretty remarkable, and the students love it. The students have mostly correct work by the time they leave class. They've corrected their pedantic details about where a comma should go and a capital here, and don't start with this symbol, and all this other stuff. And then also the logical structure of the proof. A lot of times they'll leave what they had, and then on another sheet of paper write down what was presented on the board and take some notes about what happened. So that they leave the room with basically this correct stuff on the paper, mostly correct, depending on what I let slide. The students have a record of what happened in class together with their homework. Now just think about that for a moment. Normally, students take notes, and they grab their homework and stick it someplace else. But now their homework is their notes. And that's the thing we always want them to reflect back on anyway. And so now they're actually looking at their work, their thoughts, and their homework. And it's pretty remarkable how that, I mean, why didn't we think of this before? But that's what we always want them to reflect back on, is the work they were doing, learn from their mistakes. And so now their notes is their homework, and it's all together. When students look back at their notes, they can see their comments about what they were thinking, and they see their corrected mistakes. They don't just see it perfect. They see the error fixed. And I think that's pretty profound for the learning that happens. They love this. At first I thought I really justified it the first time I did it because I thought they were going to think I was silly, and I was like, oh, it's going to be awesome and you have to do it, and they were like, they totally bought into it. I think they thought it was great. And they always talk about how fantastic it is, so it really works out, and I didn't know it was going to be so awesome. And of course, I've now minimized the time thing. It's really fast to grade, and it's helpful. So it's helpful and quick for me. Now I want to talk a little bit about the weekly homework. So on week N+1, students choose 2 problems that I starred from the previous dailies. So they turn in some dailies on week N. On the next week, they go back and pick some 2 of a subset that I picked that are proofs, and they have to write these things up. So they have to be typed, LaTeX preferred. They have to be well written, and they're only allowed to email me a PDF with a naming convention. Otherwise, I won't grade it. So it has to be weekly, whatever the number is, last name, no spaces, camelpaste.pdf. That's it. And they get used to it after about week 2. The reason for that is that I have a method for grading them so I don't have to print them out. So I store the files on Dropbox, and I use my iPad to grade them. And I use GoodReader, but there are other ones to do that. And then I email it back to the student. And you're not meant to be able to read that, but that's a PDF that a student turned in. And then there's my iPad scribbled on it, so don't worry about what the comments are, but hopefully you can see the green. So I wrote all over it on my iPad. And then I email back that version to the student. Now, why is this awesome? Well, I have them submit this on a non-class day because they're emailing it to me, so it doesn't influence their time to work on the dailies. And this is sweet because I only meet 3 days a week, and I just got 4 days worth of homework out of them. The students are forced to reflect on the previous week's stuff. I make them go back and redo the problems that they had already sort of thought about. It makes them review their notes, so they have to sort of go back and write those things up. It incorporates this multiple rounds of revision. At my school, the classes that I teach that are proof-based sort of get this writing requirement, and we have to have rounds of revision, and this sort of pulls that off. And I grade this one really harshly on a 1 to 4 scale, and my scale is from TED. Basically, again, 1 through 4 looks similar to the one I did for presentations, but I grade these pretty intensely. But I feel comfortable doing that because it's the second time they're doing it. It's not the first draft. It's not the first time they're looking at it. And I'm short on time, so maybe I'll just throw these up here quick and then say a few things and stop there. So most of my students use LaTeX to write up the weeklies. It's not required. But I refuse to talk about how to use anything else, so they're tricked into doing it. And I really support them in this endeavor. And by the end of the semester, I'd say all but 2 out of maybe a class of 25 are using LaTeX very comfortably. And to get over any barriers, one of the big obstacles is that students don't want to have to install it. It's kind of a pain in the butt. But I've been using ScriptTech, which is a free online LaTeX editor. All the students have to do is create an account, and then you can get so many free folders. Basically, they share that folder with me. And then when they have trouble, I can just go in and debug for them. We don't have to email files back and forth. It's great. And I always tell my students, so like, don't spend more than 5 minutes stressing out over LaTeX. I'll just go in there and fix it for you in 5 seconds. So that works really great. And another new thing came out called Share LaTeX, which I might switch to. It's probably a better choice, I think. But I provide my students with a template, which is what you're looking at there. They just have to go in and start modifying it. And I provide some examples of how things look, and they do really great with it. It would be nice if students could submit from there. So I guess I'm over on time, so I'll stop there.
Questions for our speaker? Well, thank our speaker. Questions for our speaker, Dane?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So you talked about their getting their homework and then marking on it, and then it sounded like you said they walked away at the end of that. Do they turn it in and the next time they walk away?
No, they hand it to me and I give it back to them the next day.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I meant walk away with.
I know, I understand. Yeah. I just wasn't sure where in there you were actually looking at it.
I look at it right after class, grade it quickly, and then have it back for them the next day.
Yeah. Is there a problem if you take their homework at the end of the day and they have to bring it to prepare the problems for the next class, which is the material that comes right after it, and they don't have with them the work they just have been doing on the previous problems? Is this a problem?
No, probably not. I think it would work just fine. Yeah. So I could sort of delay the collecting. It's probably a brilliant idea. I'll have to think about it. Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Okay. So
yeah, it seems like that would work.
They never complain about I don't have the problem on which this one is based.
No, they've never said that.
Okay.
No. I never thought about it either. But it's probably worth thinking about.
I question about the presentations, just based on some conversations I was having with people in between stuff. Are you worried at all that, like, the process of making, like, when you grade the presentations, do you worry that you'll have less of this sort of natural mistakes that come up in IDL classes because people take them more seriously, they're for a grade, and so you get less of the learning about false starts and impasses?
Right. My short little whip through probably didn't paint the right picture, but I spent a huge amount of time on marketing at the beginning of the semester, and they're highly encouraged to just come up there and give it a go.
So even though it's on a scale?
Yes, and I tell them, because it's the one grade I never show them unless they ask, so they don't. I don't want them to constantly be seeing it because it doesn't look very good. I mean,
okay.
but I tell them that I would rather, and I remind them throughout the semester, I'd rather have someone come up and try a really hard problem and fail than come up and do all the easy exercises. And they know that, and I think the key is to develop this community of trust that they know they can fail and it's not going to like impact them and make them fail. So they're at least whatever I've done, it works out really well. They're willing to come to the board and just give it a try. And I'll have students say, I didn't get this one, but let me show you how far I got. And we sometimes will pick it up from there. And those are the best presentations, not the ones where it's perfect. So I always say that was the good one, especially when it wasn't so good. So they know that. They know that's the right thing to do.
Okay, so leading in from that, where do you notate the difficulty of the problems that they're presenting?
So in my spreadsheet, there's multiple problems in the theorem sequence. There's easy exercises like compute the complement of these sets, right? And I make them come up and present those too. So in my spreadsheet, I'll say, was this an easy exercise, an easy proof, or was it a hard one? And I think that's something I need to work on because I have some students who, for the most part, skate by doing easy exercises all semester, and I sort of need a way to categorize them. One other thing that I thought about doing is sort of putting all the easy exercises sort of online that the students sort of work through and get immediate feedback on, sort of like WebWork or Coursera's doing now, or Code Academy, where they sort of work through and actually get some feedback on the stuff they type in. And then we could just do proofs in class. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do, but I thought about it.
So do they know which ones are the easy ones right now, or is that part of the...
They're labeled exercise, propositions, theorem, so they panic when they see theorem.
Some are labeled exercises.
Yeah, they panic. I've trained them to know that if they see corollary, that they know it should be really easy. So I just have to glue some pieces together. So yeah, but they roughly know which ones are hard. When I give the take-home tests, they always know that the one that looks really hard isn't. Right? So they figured me out. Yeah.
Are all your tests take home? And if so, do you have a problem with plagiarism?
Well, I could probably give another talk on that. For the most part, they're always take home. Occasionally, I'll have a mix, but there's always a take home component. And when I said I encourage collaboration, I meant it pretty seriously. So even on take home exams, I have some pretty strict rules about this. I allow them to chat with each other. You would think that this would produce carbon copy exams, but it doesn't. I see the exams that look way different than when I forbid them from talking to each other. I always give them lots of problems and they get to pick, and they have to tell me who they worked with, and the people who work together don't even always turn in the same problem. So I don't have a problem with it. It works out really well for me. I haven't had a problem with it, but I do let them sort of do, and they end up having this pride thing. They know they can work together, but now they don't want to. So it's all out there and it's transparent, and it works out well for me. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone, but.
All right, let's thank our speakers.